All right, good morning. Thank you guys for showing up so early. We're going to go ahead and get started if everyone's all right with that. We're scheduled for the hour, but depending on Q&A and things like that, we'll probably break early, all right? So we'll go ahead and get started. Today, I'm going to teach you how to leverage enterprise security when you're doing hurt or incident response, right? And so right now, current day, who does incident response for their day-to-day job that you mainly deal with things like historical data and maybe something like enterprise security isn't something that's useful for you? Is there anybody in the room that fits to? Okay. So today, I'll show you a tweak that we can make that I've made. I've essentially rewrote enterprise security to work with that data, and we can make it usable for you. So we'll start with the forward-looking statements. Essentially, long story short, because there is a ton of words on this page, based off of the stuff that I'm telling you today, don't go out and buy stock. I'm not responsible if the stock goes up or the stock goes down, but don't use today's topic for that investment, because you never know. All right, so we'll start with the introduction slide. So who am I? I am Brent Matlock. I am a consulting solutions engineer for federal security over here at Splunk. I have 10 years of defensive cyber operations. I live here in Evans, Georgia. So I was in the Army up until 2019, November of 2019, so just shy of 4 years ago, where I was there for about 4.5 years. I have 10 years of defensive cyber operations. Oh, geez. Don't look at my previews. So I have about 10 years of defensive cyber operations under my belt. I'm a security enthusiast, so I've made some apps that help the CBTs, the cyber protection teams, CNMF, things like that. Some of those notably are APT Falconer, What the Heck, Cloud Exporter, and then today what we're going to be talking about is now called Falcon Search. That's an app that runs on top of enterprise security. And then funny tidbit here is I'm actually not related to Andy Griffith. Some of you got that. Okay, so the introduction. Some of the, yeah, delayed, right? That one is only in there for people that read that, right? Like, it's, you took the time to read it, you get a little joke. Okay, so some of the main issues that we have now for doing cyber hunting or incident response, forensics analysis, things like that is we have delayed analysis, right? And so the reason for that is because, one, we're really situated as a reactive cyber, right? The industry is more of a reactive cyber. You'd make a lot of money if you could show up before something occurs. If you can figure that out, that's a business idea right there. You can make money all day long. But because of that, and the way that traditional tools work for us, is for that use case, we show up, we've missed threats, right? We have limited situational awareness because we're kind of dealing with an environment that maybe isn't our own. Maybe it's another customer's environment that we're showing up to. But we have lack of fidelity of what actually is going on, right? Data overload. So because we're trying to onboard all of that historical data, we tend to fill up queues and pipelines with our ingest, which caused some delayed. I mean, the delay that is caused from data overload is not that big of an impact because, I mean, we're probably looking at 3-month-old data anyway. What's another hour? This actually hurts, rather, the regulatory compliance, right, and then the reputation and trust for what we have going on, because if we're taking indicators of compromise from that historical data that we're looking at, we're not looking at the context of when it occurred, but we're looking at the historical data against the reputation today, right? So it might be 90 days old that it was found, and we might be looking at 90-day-old data. At that time, it was very relevant, right? It was hotness. But now I'm looking at things, and it's not really relevant because my reputation score is 90 days old, right? And so that kind of becomes an issue for us. So the importance of being able to do time-based analysis or analytics right, is paramount for us to kind of solve all of these problems, to be able to go back and look in time and not just use the tools that we have available to us to only look back in present time. So that will help aid in rapid threat detection, right? Because we are not doing ad hoc searches. We're not kind of going through and manually doing what we would, any like searching or querying that the tool itself should be doing for us. It helps with forensics investigation, behavioral analysis, and then the compliance piece again. And the reason why is because of the kind of the last point for the reputation and trust of it being an issue. Again, if I'm looking at a URL, right, that 90 days C2 typically changes pretty rapidly. So maybe I look and I go do a centralops.net on a URL or an IP address, and that C2 has changed. So I'm not getting the right information because I'm not correlating the two against each other at the same time. So the problem here is time, right? The main issue that we're having in the threat hunt, especially for incident response, forensics analysis and stuff, the problem here that we're running into is time. And there's 4 main causes for issues with time. Networking delays, maybe sending from site to a SaaS offering, you know, the egress pipeline is kind of filled up or whatever. The volume of ingest, maybe I don't have the architecture to support that volume of index, and so therefore I'm filling up queues, really overworking and stressing the system, and so things will fill up in a temporary cache before I can actually write those events to disk to make them usable. Historical data, right? That one is one that kind of, it's hard to get around because like I said, we're in a reactive situation, right? We're not, as an industry, in a position where we show up before things happen, right? And so to get around the historical data ingestion, you really got to move into a proactive cyber, which is not what this talk is about. And it's one of the things that will always, in my eyes, be present. And then lastly, the improper timestamp configuration. So say you're onboarding data, you're giving instructions on how to parse the data, where to put it in a time series index, but your configuration is wrong. It is occurring today, but it's pulling the timestamp wrong, and so it's either indexing into the future or it's indexing into the past. And it's not being placed where it's supposed to be. Maybe because of time zone differences, you didn't account for that between GMT and EST or whatever, right? There's plus or minus 5 or 6 depending on daylight savings time. And so what that looks like here on the slide, so that, because one thing I've noticed, especially talking about time, is regardless of how smart you are, there's always people that tend to not understand the concept of time. And so I did my best to kind of graph this out. So we're ingesting something into Splunk, and each of these blocks are 3 different types of searches. If I index something time now, right, at 9 a.m. on Thursday morning, right, I'm ingesting it now, but the timestamp of the event is back here, I never look at that data because my search, that search that would have picked it up is already executed, right? And so this is the same thing. I didn't include like a time scale here outside of just the initial timestamps here, but this could be an hour, this could be a year, this could be a month. The same concept kind of shows up and re-evolves here, especially if you're doing incident response. Something is occurring, I'm constantly indexing information, that time will continue to move to the right as we get into present. And then based off of the delay, because of network, because of volume, because of the historical data, this is going to continuously always trail behind. And so I'm not being able to take benefit of the software, right, or the tools that come in that software suite, because it's never actually searching any of the data that we're ingesting. And so this is an example for the timestamp of the event, so the time at which an event occurred versus the time at which it was indexed into Splunk. So we have 8:14, 8:15, and then we're about, I think that's 20 hours behind, right, give or take, for some dirty napkin math. So if I'm running a search that's based off of this timestamp, that's that current day, current time, looking at on the 17th at 9 o'clock in the morning, all the way searching back an hour, and I'm looking at 8, I would have never looked at this event because it completely missed the bucket, right? So what we're advocating for, or at least what I'm advocating for, is instead of using the timestamp of the individual events, we can use the timestamp of ingest, because I'm ingesting current events now regardless of how old those events are. Even if they're a year old, I'm still ingesting them now. I can ensure that I have high fidelity, I have the additional overage, and I'm taking full advantage of enterprise security for every event that comes in my ingest pipeline. And so what I've done is change the way that we do correlation searches. Who here has ever made a dashboard and used a base search to post-process down into panels? Okay, one, perfect, my star pupil. Okay, so essentially the way that we currently do things out of the box today is we have 1,500 correlation searches or analytical stories that we provide you as an analyst out of the box detections, right? That requires no manual manipulation, but the only drawback to that is the way that we do those. Each of those pieces of analysis is an individual search, and they all take up a thread, and they're very resource intensive. That leads to continued searches, which means that a search was started, something maybe more priority kicked off, there was a pause, and then it came back and finished it. It was complete, which means it started and it finished and had no issues at all, or it was skipped. So a skipped search is something that it will never go back and rerun itself. So it's an artificial gap in collection. Even if you're not doing incident response, if you're looking at current data, you're missing those detections. So at scale, I just presented this new version of enterprise security at our last internal conference at .conf this year in Vegas. And we were doing, I think we had 854 searches enabled, 2 terabytes of daily ingest on systems that were minimum system requirements, so 24 vCPUs, 32 gigs of RAM. We were skipping 80% of our searches on standard, and then the new version of Falcon Search, we had 0 skipped, 0 continued. Admittingly, that would spike every once in a while up to 6 continued searches because there's just some of the stuff I just didn't care to try to optimize. But we could get that number down to 0 very easily. So if you're on in an environment where you're not working in rack, right, where you have flyaway kits, you're resource constrained on what you have available to be able to do this analysis, this would be the solution for you because it's, and we'll get into it, but it's a lot less resources being used on the kit to provide you additional analysis that you currently do not have the ability to do. So the biggest thing that I want to point out here is this new field, and I say new, but it's probably new to most people. It's actually been in here since I believe it was 7.x, right? And so this is not a enterprise security-ism, it's just regular core Splunk. So what we're doing is we're running our correlation or our base search every 6 minutes. So I call it the 0 minute, the 0, 6, 12, 18, all the way to 54. We're looking at the -7 minutes and -1 minute ago. So again, that doesn't care how old that data is. I'm just looking at the events that I've indexed during that time. This allows me to, again, take year-old data, 2-year-old data, be indexing it and still running it and getting the overwatch that enterprise security allows me. So, standard out of the box. This is what I was talking about. If I'm not using the ingest time, or even if I am using the index time, I'm only ever looking back an hour. So even if I'm pulling my event data and I'm saying, hey, go off of the ingest time, even if it's 3 months, 6 months, whatever, but then take all of that data and only look for events that match -70 and -10. How many of my events are being executed, this search being executed against, if I'm looking at 3-month-old data? 0, because they're all 3-month-old events. They're not within, they don't fall within this last hour. So again, by not modifying this and not going off of the ingest time, I'm providing myself no service. I'm just wasting resources running searches for nothing. So based off of the new version, all we do is we just change the modifiers, the start time and the end time, to all time. Essentially, this is what that equates to. This will run, again, years old data, hour old data, 10 minutes old data. And then the way that the correlation searches now is they run off of now, and now always occurs after that initial base search. So I do a base search, then this example here is being ran every 6 minutes on the 3-minute. So 3, what is that, 3, 9, 15, I'm terrible at math. There's a picture for it. But this is always being executed on the data after the initial grab. So we ensure that every event that we're ingesting is something that we're running against the tool. So the benefits of using index time versus the timestamp of the event, or just underscore time. This allows incident response to now be used within enterprise security, something that in the past did not occur. It wasn't something that you probably even thought to look at. This allows you to take full advantage of the correlation searches, right? So traditional, if you want to look for something that maps to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, say some execution type stuff for lateral movement, you got to go find those searches and then run them in an ad hoc situation, right? I got to go back and manually run those. I don't get the benefits that enterprise security gives me. I don't get any of the additional frameworks. I don't get the content enrichment, right? So the asset and identity framework. I don't get the risk management for the low and slow. I don't get a notable so that I can start an investigation. I just get a search with some, hopefully not results, because if you're doing incident response, no results is a good day, right? It means that there wasn't a detection of that. But if there is something, there's no benefit of running that ad hoc search, because you don't get to take any of the free stuff that comes with enterprise security, right? The free benefits of actually using an additional tool. And that's where we get into the asset and identities management. And so just quickly, we'll talk about asset and identities. Essentially what we have is, if I have a detection that says, hey, show me anytime something does a LSAS dump, okay? There's 3 things that I'll always get back. I'll get an endpoint, I'll get a user, and I'll get a process, right? Because one of the processes is interacting with LSAS. There has to be a user logged in, and there's a machine that occurred on. So asset and identities framework, what that'll do is it says, hey, Brent logged into workstation 1, and he used calc.exe to do an LSAS dump, right? Totally not going to happen in real world situations. It's bad. But I only have Brent, workstation A, and calc.exe. Brent now goes to the identity management, and now I have an email, bmatlock@splunk.com. I have a phone number. I have first name, last name. I have additional usernames. So maybe I have an Azure account, an O365 account. You went from that one single pivot point to multiple pivot points to where I can get fidelity around that context of that event. Same thing for that workstation. Instead of having just workstation A to pivot off of, I maybe have an FQDN. I might have an IP address. I might have a MAC address. I might have a latitude and longitude, a physical location for that device, right? That's kind of stuff that you as an analyst would be spending cycles on getting that information. Enterprise security automatically does that for you based off of the data that you're already collecting. Risk-based alerting. So everything that occurs might not generate a notable, might not send off the pin flare, but everything that somebody does has an inherent value of risk, and so this allows you to find low and slow. If I was a nation state or an adversary, I'm not going to show in and do bull in the China shop, right? I'm going to log in, maybe do an ARP, then I'm going to log out, and I'm not going to come back for another week or so, and I'm going to do something else. Well, that risk score still piles up, and so you have the ability to find really low and slow things that there are not normal detections for. And then the biggest thing, the last bullet here, is now using this new method, time is no longer an issue, right? So we can, if you're not doing the incident response and you're not using a flyaway kit, you can use this still current. It doesn't affect the way that you do your operations. It just ensures that every event comes through. But if you are using that incident response or a flyaway kit, you can ensure that that historical data you're onboarding is taking full advantage of enterprise security. So, the transition point. I really liked this quote because I wanted to find something about, one, searching, but two, around time. And so this is from Richard Whitehead, who is he's the lead forensics investigator for the White House, right? And so he says, in the realm of investigations, time is the currency of success. The ability to conduct super fast searches empowers field agents to transform information into intelligence swiftly, gaining the critical edge in deciphering complexity and unveiling truth. The biggest part to me was this. Time is a currency of success. If we're not making the proper currency for the way that we do our operations, how can we ever truly be successful, right? We're kind of just spinning our wheels in the mud, right? If there's a tool that you can leverage that'll do 90% of the lifting, why tire out the team doing it manually when it can be automated? And so that's what enterprise security really helps with. So I'm going to explain to you why you would want to make these changes within your environment. Well, at these percentages here are the lowest percentages of increase that I found. They obviously get better at smaller scale. This was at a 100 terabytes of daily ingest. These are the performance increases that I've seen comparing enterprise security to Falcon Search. 49% less CPU being used, 70% less memory, and 60% faster searches. The best part about this and these improvements is that we are no longer using data model acceleration, so there's no additional storage requirements, and we're still getting the performance increase. So, I told you guys when I first started here, I've been at Splunk for 4 years. 3 years, 10 months, 4 years. I wasn't always in the sales org or the consulting engineering side of the house. I started as professional services. And oddly enough, when I left the Army at the CPB, I started at Splunk. My first customer was the CPB, right? So I just came back a little fatter and had a beard, and people didn't recognize me. But one of the things that I hated while I was on the teams and doing this, personally, was we have 1,500 pieces of analysis, but I can't turn them all on. When I turn them all on, things go really bad for us, right? Borderline fires. I mean, not really, but it seems like that way, right? So I knew that there had to be a way to enable all of this content and make it useful for the teams. And so this app and this method was born out of that, right? Wanting to continue to assist the mission and make people successful while not having to worry about, getting yelled at by my superiors for like wasting time or something like that. So, like I said earlier, if you've ever made a dashboard, you do a base search, one single broad search, and then I can take those search results and filter them down to individual panels. So if I have a dashboard that has 10 panels, instead of running 10 individual searches, I could probably power all of those by one search, right? So one big search, and then in the background, doing a little more investigating, I wanted to find out how does that one search get used 10 different times essentially. Well, what happens is the the search equals base, that is, the contents, that's how I reference them. And then if I go look at search ID, right? So up here at the very top, right here, this is the search that gets executed. And then my search ID is just filtering down the results of here, right? And then so on and so forth. So I wanted to figure out how this correlation was being made to here and how those search results were being used. And essentially what happens is a watcher kicks off, and that watcher will grab the search ID, and then the search ID gets loaded into load job, and the search results come and live in dispatch, which is essentially a cache. And so I found a way to re-reference the search results out of just using a dashboard. And so what we're doing is the same concept. It's nothing new. It's just a new approach to how we're doing correlation searches. So then, how did I apply this, right? How did I apply that newfound logic? Well, I created safe searches that would go out and grab all of the information that I wanted. So for here, this is PowerShell. So there are 88 correlation searches. And I see people taking pictures. Please feel free. If I'm going too fast, tell me. But also these slides are publicly available. On the very last slide, I'll have a link for you. So PowerShell search drives 88 searches, right? So go out, grab all of the stuff. Again, we're doing the ingest time, the index time, not the timestamp. And then what I do is I rewrite my correlation search to start with this load job. And essentially what that tells the search head is don't go look at the indexing tier. Let the indexing tier still index. We've already got these search results on disk. Go through and take those search results and then do the filtering. So this top line, where to go look, and then do my filtering, and then create a statistics table so that I have something to work with. Another added benefit of doing this that I found is that because I'm no longer using data model acceleration, I can include raw. So that means that when I have a notable or an incident fire off, I no longer have to spend analytic cycles to go find out why that detection exploded and gave me a notable. I can just go look at the underlying event at the same time. So, what does this look like? One, you can do it yourself. As somebody that did it themselves, I don't recommend that. But you can if you're a glutton for punishment. So what I did was I actually created another app. DAESS is just an app that rides on top of enterprise security. We're calling it Falcon Search. I mainly called it Falcon Search to kind of fit with my quote-unquote brand with APT Falconer. It comes with 16 searches. So there are 16 broad searches that we can do to drive all of the content within enterprise security. That will drive 1,000, and now we're up to 1,084 because I'm continuing to build it, right? There's 1,084 correlation searches that come with the app now, and there's no setup for it. The only thing that you have to do is if you look here at the base search, they all start with a macro. You just got to go tell it what the index is. And to be fair, you don't have to because the initial value is index equals star. It's just a little more performant if you tell it to not look in the Linux logs for PowerShell stuff, right? And then based off of the 6 minutes, right, it actually executes all of our correlation searches every 6 minutes, so you have a 10 times mean time to detection, right? So if you're a customer that's not doing incident response, that's doing in rack, you have the ability now to find your detections 10 times faster. So current enterprise security runs once an hour, a correlation search once an hour, minus 70 and minus 10. So the best case scenario is something occurs instantaneously, the same correlation search that would find that detection comes off, and I find it 10 minutes later, right? That's best case scenario. Worst case scenario running these every 6 minutes is I find it 7 minutes after occurrence. So on my worst day, I'm still better than the best day for traditional enterprise security. And because, and it's not listed here, but because we are using, not using data model acceleration, this also helps with mean time to remediation because I no longer have to ship just a notable to something like SOAR. I can ship raw. and start immediately taking action. All of the content, you can turn it all on or you can turn it all off. So if you don't have this is not an all or nothing approach, right? So this is kind of the same approach that you typically take with what your stuff is now. If there's no Kubernetes, don't turn that stuff on. If there's no Azure, don't turn it on. But because we're saving so much resources doing this, it's not going to hurt you to just keep it on. And then the best part is that there's no additional changes. Not only no changes to your environment, but there's no changes to the code, right? This isn't something that you have to wait to be GA available next year or whatever. This is something that you can literally do today. It's nothing new, but is something new. And it's just thinking out of the box on how we can do things more efficiently. Take an already applied best practice and apply that to how we do things today. So we have some additional resources for you guys. So the app itself is hosted on GitHub. It does have a disclaimer at the very top. This is not a Splunk supported app. Even though I am at Splunk, I'm an employee at Splunk, it's self-maintained, self-hosted by myself. So if you have issues, don't put in a support ticket with Splunk, just put in an issue on GitHub and I can help you. We also have all of the documentation that breaks this down on if there's additional content that you might already have that's custom content and you want to know how to migrate this through. This tells you step by step how to take, start to finish. And then today's slides are bit.ly technet _ I hate that it underscores the hyperlink, but there is an underscore between technet and ES. So with that, we'll move on to questions. Does anybody have any questions? Or is it too early for questions? I got some smiles from that. All right, well, I guess, yeah.
So the practicality of this, like how have you implemented in real world practices?
Okay.
Specifically, for larger organizations like the Department of Defense, which is a little different from commercial.
Of course, and just to ease, just for the audio recording, I'm going to briefly rephrase what you just asked. You tell me if I'm right or wrong. So the question was, how have we incorporated this in real world situations, and how is this implemented for DoD customers, not commercial customers, essentially, correct? Cool. All right, so one, how have we applied this in real world? We actually have customers out there using this today. While we are talking in the context today, mostly around enterprise security, this actually can be used for not enterprise security. This approach is not enterprise security specific. Essentially what we're doing, low-hanging fruit, is we're tricking Splunk into using dispatch as a cache. So we have very high volume customers that are relying on an incident occurring, right? Some detection from some ticketing system, SOAR, XOR, whatever. They're waiting on that ticket creation and they're just looking at the ticket to find out what's going on. They're not looking at raw logs because they're getting billions of events and it's something that they can't manage. Using something like this, they've now been able to take that previously unusable data and made it something that they can search because they're searching it locally. And so how do we implement this in real world situations? Like I said, you take your standard existing information for enterprise security and your Splunk setup, and you just install this app on the search head. There's no additional anything else that needs to be involved. Obviously, if you're looking at PowerShell events or if you're looking at Azure events, you need to have the proper TAs to be able to parse the underlying data, right? That should be a requirement. But outside of that, there's no additional tweaking or tuning that you need to do. It finds your stuff right out of the back. Now, if you've paid any attention and looked behind the scenes for some of the correlation searches, if I'm looking at an hour and I have a where clause, right, that says, hey, find excessive failed logons, and I'm looking at an hour and it says where the total count is greater than 20. Well, I probably should modify that number a little bit because I'm only looking again at 7 minutes worth of time, right? So I probably need to bring that down a little bit and say maybe where the it's 8 or whatever, and you'll find that sweet spot. That's always something that you as an organization should be doing anyway. Don't just turn on content because some of them are loud, some of them are false positives. That's why I highly recommend, if you haven't heard about it, research.splunk.com. All of the stuff that's listed within enterprise security, there's documentation for every one of those correlation searches and detections on how to tweak and tune, how to modify the risk-based alerting, what false positives looks like, how to determine if something is a false positive. It's a very good website. So when we add content into enterprise security, we also add that into research.splunk.com. And then for you, for specific DoD, no additional changes need to be made. Because your data looks the exact same as anybody else that has PowerShell or Windows event logs turned on, right? Nothing special about that. And none of this stuff does external calls, so you don't have to worry about being in an air gap situation or not on never. Does that answer your question? Cool. Any other questions? Yeah. And then I'll get to you.
Absolute least favorite things to do is fix other people's code. But I find when I download apps from like the Splunk base, like that's what I'm spending like 90% of my time doing, is trying to cater things to my environment, and documentation just sucks or it doesn't exist at all. So like, what's the shortcut for like if you were to implement like somebody else's app into your environment, like you go in first and disable all save searches and then kind of turn them on one by one after you implement some of this kind of optimization?
Yeah, okay, so question was, downloading stuff from Splunk base, it seems like you spend a lot of cycles refactoring it to work for your environment. What is the best approach or fastest way to be able to, that I take to do that for another customer's environment, correct? Okay, so the first thing, yes. None of those saved searches should be turned on when you ship an app. That's part of our app inspect. We don't turn anything on from default. And so same with this. I adhere to the best practices. All of these 1,084 searches now, 82 searches, none of them come turned on because, again, it's kind of a pick your own poison, right? You can turn everything on if you want, but I don't want to make that decision for you. And so the easiest thing that I've found is using macros, because it's pretty easy and convenient to just say, if I want to turn on this base search, the source type, the index time, that's always pretty universal because that tells me where I'm going to be getting that information from. The only thing that I have to ensure is that I have the right apps installed to be able to parse the fields and map them to common information model. That's the biggest downside, and I think probably something that doesn't get stressed on enough. And so that's why you spend a lot of time kind of tweaking and tuning it to make it work with your environment. Not only that, it's okay, I'm getting PowerShell or I'm getting Windows events. I got the app on the search head and I got the app on the universal forwarder, but it also should go on the indexing tier for index time extraction. It knows where the event boundaries are and stuff like that. I'm a firm believer if it's a TA, right, a download that does not have visualizations, just install that bad boy everywhere. If it doesn't need it, Splunk is smart enough to ignore it, and if it does need it, at least it has it. There's very convoluted, coming from an app developer standpoint, there's very convoluted where everything occurs, where the evals and field alias and all of this stuff occur. And then it breaks it down even further of where does this occur if it's a streaming command or a generating command or a typing command, right? That kind of stuff plays into a role. But the biggest thing that I do is, one, I make sure that everything is turned off, and then I just vet it against my data. And vetting it against the data, it's fine to just manually run that search, run that base search and see if you get results. If you do, then cool, right? Turn it on, wait for one of the cron schedules to start, then run one of the executions against the load job. And what I do is verify by removing the where filter. So for here, right, I would run this search, verify that I get search results coming back, then I would enable it and say, hey, at 0, 6, 12, whatever it's going to run into, it's going to do its own thing. So I'll be able to reference it with this load job. And then I would remove this entire column because there's a good chance that I don't have anything malicious in there. And then just look at the stats, right? Am I getting all of those fields coming out? Then that means that my data is good. Otherwise, I need to find out why that's not working. Does that answer your question? as always though, the hardest part is you're trying to infer what a lot of other people are trying to come across with their app. That's why the documentation, so if you go to this Falcon search, I'm going to be blunt with you guys. I suck at documentation. I'm that guy. So I had 3 other people assist me with it that started to finish, take notes on things that you think are useful, and then we kind of collaborated and put those all together because I'm the creator of the app and the process, so I don't think about, oh yeah, it's important to tell them that they should probably change the time from earliest and latest to, 0 and now so that they search all events. Well, that's an implied on my end. I don't, you know what I mean? Documentation is there. There's a good README on the actual GitHub link itself, and then I'm working on another wiki as well. Any other questions? Perfect. I don't even know what time it is. Hey, look at there. Get 10 minutes free. Oh yeah, because I think we have 10 more minutes so you can scan for your CEUs. So let's pretend. Is there anything that I can go back and explain a little bit better for you? I can just monologue or dance or.
As long as you're talking, I'm fine.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so I technically could live demo. Actually, why don't we do this then? Let's bring up here F11. Let's go through the documentation. Maybe, please.
Sir, can I get a clarification? I just asked a question back here, but I don't know if it's clear on this. Is this one specific, or like is it part of the company and what you guys offer as tools, or?
So this is Splunk specific for the talk. The approach is not. The approach can be used for any tool. It's advised to not look at the timestamp of the event, but rather look at the timestamp of it being ingested into whatever platform. Falcon Search is a Splunk app, but it is not affiliated with Splunk. I'm self-hosting and doing all of the stuff by myself until it's going through all the patent process and things like that. It is going to be just built right into enterprise security. Okay?
Thank you for clarifying.
You're very welcome. Yep. Correct. Yeah, we want to look. What URL is that? That's it. I'm going to get fired. I don't know how Bitly turned into a Netherlands. Oh, boo. Okay. So yes, so look at the timestamp of when it was ingested, not off of the timestamp of the individual event. And the reason why is because if I want to ensure that every event that comes through gets looked at, I'm going to run into checking the same event multiple times, which is a waste of compute, right? And it's highly inefficient. And if we're already skipping running them every hour, it would really skip if we were looking at every piece of data every time that we ran the correlation search for an hour. So we specifically do the initial grab, which is here. Sorry. So we do the initial grab here, right? This container that we're looking at is only looking at events that were indexed in a 6-minute time period with an offset of 1 minute, so that I'm still not, I can ensure that I grab every single event that's already been indexed. During that -1 minute and now we could be still indexing, or there could be, a handful that we skip. So we want to ensure that everyone comes through. So we always offset. And then when I do this load job, I'm telling it to look at all time, but I'm just telling it to look in the confines of this last grab. So it'll only ever be that 6 minute of ingest time period, regardless of if it's a year-old data or whatever. And so when we tell it load job, there is a way to kind of chain them. Some of the additional slides that are in here, if you look through, there's some additional how to chain them. Maybe I want to go back and look at a longer time period. You can chain those. But by default, there's an implicit artifact offset 0 right here, which is the first object in the array. And then I can append offset 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I get what you're saying. So you're pulling the latest or the last ingest, if you will.
Yep.
So that you have just that data versus continuing to look at everything each time that you're trying to find that data, correct?
Correct.
I just want to make sure I was understanding what you put down.
Yeah, of course. It's a great question. Because like I said earlier, right, the time is the hardest thing for people to kind of understand. It doesn't make sense of why I would look at ingest time versus not real time. But in the context of on a linear scale, now occurs at always the furthest right point. And I could be looking back here. If I'm not looking back far enough from here to there, I'll never see those events. This allows us to see those events. This is a quick, so there are additional slides to this deck that are really not ones to kind of talk about, but we have a couple minutes, so why not? This kind of shows you what that conversion from standard correlation search out of the box down here at the bottom to new version. And they're just color coded, right? So the red is typically where we find that commonality, that broad strokes based search. It's typically built around the data model. So we say authentication is the data model here. Well, we have a saved search that goes and grabs all of the authentication events at the very top. So we say, hey, go look at those events, do the same searching, right? For the where clause is the filtering down. Then we turn a t-stats into a stats. The only big thing here to remember is that because we're not using a data model, my fields are now called app, signature, dest, user. They're not called app authentication, action, authentication, user, et cetera, right? Because those fields never exist, you would never get results. So you have to make sure to change those. And then the fuchsia or this purple color here, these stay the same. I guarantee that nobody in this room has read this in the documentation for enterprise security. But rather than making a change to the search, all we ask you to do is come through and change the macros to do your additional filtering. But what is the first thing that people do? Typically just add in another line and say, filter out these hosts or whatever. What that does on the back end is that moves that from default to local, and so we'll never be able to help you with the new content, whereas just changing the macro doesn't change the search. So that as we improve our analytics up here to help filter out some of those noise or the false positives, you would never be able to benefit from that. And I guarantee that most people haven't read that, because I don't think I've ever shown up to a customer that didn't have stuff in local. Any other questions?
And this is on the slide deck, I think.
Yep, yeah, TechNet _ES, this is the slide deck that you would have. There's just 6 or 7 slides that I hid. We got 2 minutes. Who's excited it's the last day? Yeah. Yes.
How's life different for you? This is a completely non-technical question, but how's life different for you now than it was in CEUs in terms of how you view your role in the threat hunter?
Okay, that's a good caveat at the end there, because I was about to go 8. Well, I'm an adult now. No, so I think being able to take a step back and not have to play some of the politics that you guys have to play with how you conduct you use your tools and do things like that. being able to not have to rely on the free cycles to develop tools and capabilities that I always wanted, I think has been kind of life-changing for me, and making sure that I fully understand the concepts that are required and the skill sets that are required to be able to do my job, right? I was part of CPT 401, which is in UCOM, and so anytime I conducted a mission, it was a 9.5 to 10-hour flight, right? Because we would always have to go somewhere in Europe. And because of that op tempo and stuff that we were doing, I didn't have a lot of chances to attend schools, to better myself professionally or personally, because I was trying to keep up on the Army side of things, right? I wanted to get the promotions and keep my scores and work on APFTs and things like that. And so I always felt that my professional life came at the cost of neglecting my family, because I had to do that on my own time. I wasn't afforded a lot of the time to better myself during my duty hours. And so I think that now that I'm out, I kind of make my own schedule, especially now. I travel every other week now. And so it's 1 week of doing my job, 1 week of bettering myself. Understanding how I can better optimize my threat hunting, right? And so I'm not going to say, I won't stand here and tell you that I hated every minute of being in the Army. I loved it. I still look back and wish I could still be in sometimes, even though I make a lot more money. But I think being able to manage my own time is beneficial, right?
Sounds like you do more tool development now than in the past, when you're more of an analyst or operator. Is that fair?
I would say that I'm probably 50-50. So the weeks that I am traveling, I'm running around training analysts within the federal DoD IC space. So I still do the analyst standpoint, because I have to be able to know what it's like to be down there to really relate to the operators. But I definitely do more. Tool development than I did at the CPB. Great question. Tried to tippy-toe around it. It's just amazing.
Yeah, it's, I'm not a cyber officer. I do strategy plans and power plans.
No.
But, I do reflect on, I'm just interested in how, the military versus the private sector thinks about threat hunting.
Yeah.
From an outsider's perspective.
I still butt heads with my civilian counterparts, because I still have the Army mentality when it comes to the threat, right? But I also have the understanding that we can't continuously live in a reactive cyber organization and be successful. We have to eventually start moving from reactive to proactive. And so now it's, what does that proactive stuff look like? It looks like zero trust. It looks like RMF compliance and things like that, right? So not necessarily the incident response side of things or the incident analysis side of the things, but we have to also do a better job of safeguarding ourselves so that we have cycles to move from reactive to proactive. Any other questions? I think I'm getting the thumbs up, so I think that you guys can go get your CEUs now. Thank you, guys.